Greetings to Ms. Layla and Ms. Lohaswari. My name is Brian Cheong, and in this presentation, I'll be presenting on topic 1, will Ritalin increase the performance of working memory in children with ADHD? So the objective of this presentation is to answer the topic question, and in order to achieve that, we will be discussing 3 literatures that may be for or against the topic. And after discussing their findings, you'll then evaluate each literature on its pros and cons, and then close out the presentation with a conclusive statement. So let's start with the first source. Methylphenidate improves the visual spatial memory in children with ADHD. In the first source, the experimental objective is to investigate the effects of Ritalin on visual spatial memory with children with ADHD. And in order to achieve that, the children are given a computerized test to gauge whether Ritalin reduces the amount of error they make, increases the capacity to store visual spatial information, and improve the capacity of visual spatial planning. So the results of this study has found that Ritalin does improve the visual spatial storage and does reduce the amount of error they make. However, it does not improve their visual spatial planning. The results suggest that Ritalin improves the working memory process, but does not improve their strategy, planning, or attention. Moving on to the second source, the effects of Ritalin on working memory functioning in children with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder by Cobell et al. 2009. So the objective of this study is to clarify which effect Ritalin induces on the functional network of the working memory of children with ADHD. And to achieve that, the study actually uses an MRI scanner to scan the brain activity of children with ADHD after taking Ritalin. It is also worth noting that in this study, there's a healthy control of children without ADHD to be compared to with the children with ADHD. So the result of this study has shown that Ritalin does improve the visual spatial storage and auditory verbal storage of children with ADHD. The study notes that adults with ADHD actually perform just as well as the children as the healthy controls without taking Ritalin, while the children with ADHD could not perform as well as the healthy controls until they took Ritalin. But they did not perform just as well as them, they just performed similarly. There was also no significant difference in the brain activation pattern of the children with ADHD after taking Ritalin. And the study suggests that Ritalin did not normalize the brain activity in the children with ADHD. So we can move on to the third source, anxiety, Ritalin response, and working memory in children with ADHD by Burdett and Tannock, 2007. So the experimental objective of this study is to examine the effect of Ritalin on the auditory verbal modality, visual spatial modality, and storage and manipulation of the working memory. And the secondary objective is to determine whether comorbid anxiety moderates the impact of Ritalin. So what is comorbid anxiety? Well, in this study, it actually means patients or the children with ADHD and anxiety. So in the results in this slide, we can see that there's a table, two categories of children with ADHD, one with just ADHD and the other with ADHD and anxiety. And there's also 4 categories of working memory. We can see that Ritalin actually had a positive impact on the performance of working memory for all 3 categories except for the auditory verbal storage. However, Ritalin only had a positive impact on performance for visual spatial manipulation for the children with ADHD and anxiety. However, Ritalin did not improve the performance for the other 3 working memory. What this shows is that comorbid ADHD moderates the effect of Ritalin or lessens the effect of Ritalin on children with ADHD and anxiety. It reduces the impact of Ritalin, therefore reducing the amount of benefits they receive from Ritalin compared to kids with just regular ADHD. So let's evaluate our evidence. In the first source, we can see that they particularly focus on only the visual spatial working memory, which makes the study more specialized and less prone to mistakes or making more detailed. Secondly, it also explores planning. So the other 2 sources did not discuss planning. They only discussed the manipulation and storage of working memory. But this study actually also touches on planning, which makes it an upside. However, its downside is that only the acute effects are recorded. This basically just means that only the effects were recorded right after giving the kid Ritalin. Secondly, the study also did not record the excitement of the children with ADHD, because children tend to be more excited when it comes to stuff like computer games. So a computerized test may actually excite a child. And if a child with ADHD decides to give it more attention or more enthusiasm, the results might actually be skewed or might have changed. So they did not record the excitement for the children. Lastly, the sample size is also a bit small. You only had 26 participants. The smaller the sample size, the less concrete it is. So that will be the downsides for the first source. Moving on to the second source, its advantages is that it took a very scientific approach because it is an MRI scanner to scan the brain activities. This removes the human factors, which may create mistakes. The human factors could be the testers making a mistake when giving a test, or maybe the children being excited for the test. Then it might change the results and not be as accurate. However, the downsides is that they did not give the healthy control Ritalin too. So had they given the healthy control Ritalin and give the ADHD children Ritalin, we would be able to compare both their brain activities and then maybe draw a new conclusive statement. However, the study passed up on an opportunity, so that's kind of a shame. And secondly, the other con is that they did not differentiate ADHD and their comorbidity. So the study noted that there were children with ADHD and with a comorbid condition. However, they did not decide to segregate them. Instead, they just put them all into the same category of just children with ADHD. So they ignored the fact that some of them had comorbid disorders. Thirdly, the study may also lack practicality because in science, there are theory and there's practicals. So the theory is using the machine and seeing that in theory, Ritalin improved the certain part of the brain. However, the study could have also included a computer test to then have a practical test of their abilities. That way, they can have the MRI scans information and the practical information, and they can compare them and see if they both add up, or if they contradict each other. However, the study only focused on the MRI scan, so that's another downside to the study. Lastly, the sample size is only 14 participants, which is very small. On the third source, the advantages is that they recorded the heterogeneity of the comorbid ADHD. So heterogeneity just basically means that it's very diverse. They're not all the same, and we cannot generalize them. So certain kids with ADHD comorbidity may experience lesser advantages from Ritalin than a child with just ADHD. Secondly, the study also had a very large sample size of 130 participants. So the larger sample size, the more concrete the evidence are, the better the study. However, the con is also similar to the first source, and that only the acute effects were recorded. So we can move on to the conclusion. We can draw the conclusion on 5 points. So the first point is that Ritalin does indeed improve the performance of working memory in children with ADHD. Secondly, we can also conclude that the comorbidity of ADHD patients actually moderates the effects of Ritalin on children. Some children may experience more benefits from Ritalin, some may experience less due to the heterogeneity of their condition. And on the third one, the results was also inconsistent. So the third study and the second study had inconsistent results, where the second study said that Ritalin has a positive impact on the performance of auditory verbal storage, whereas the third study disagreed and said that it did not have a positive impact on the verbal auditory storage. This further drives home the heterogeneity of the condition of ADHD and tells us that we shouldn't generalize the condition. And for the fourth point, therapy should be included when giving kids Ritalin. So while Ritalin may improve their working memory process, it does not improve their planning. And that's where therapy comes in, where they can teach the children how to think before they act. And then therefore, as a result, the child, after taking Ritalin, will have a working memory process that is as good as a healthy child, and also have the planning that is as good as a healthy child. Lastly, specialization. Due to the heterogeneity of all of these kids with ADHD, it is important that a clinician evaluates each child and then give them the therapy and the Ritalin according to their specific needs, because we cannot generalize them and just give them the same dose of Ritalin and call it a done case, because all of these kids react differently to Ritalin. So these are the references for the study, and I would like to thank you for taking the time of watching the presentation, and I hope you have a nice day. Thank you very much.